Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, August 5th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the Ohio Senate race and former Senator Sherrod Brown as he considers yet again another bid for U.S. Senate in the 2026 midterm elections. Now, Ohio at baseline actually should not be having a Senate election this cycle. When J.D. Vance was elected to be vice president, the Ohio Senate seat became vacant, to which it required Governor Mike DeWine, the Republican governor of Ohio, to appoint a replacement in this state, to which he appointed the lieutenant governor to this seat right now, which has its election this upcoming midterm cycle, but another election 2 years later. And the reason for that is because J.D. Vance was elected in 2022. So on the 6-year term, there must be another election, even though they are having one this November, or next November, rather. And so that's important context when going into this analysis and understanding around Sherrod Brown's candidacy, because if he does decide to act on running for U.S. Senate, he would not only be up this midterm cycle, but also the next presidential cycle. So it'd be about, 3 elections in the span of 4 years. Now, Sherrod Brown is a very big name and a very big one for the Democratic Party in terms of actively considering a Senate bid in a state that Democrats have nearly entirely written off for the Senate elections in the 2026 year. Ohio being a state that Donald Trump won by 11 points in the last election, Sherrod Brown ran for Senate on the same ballot and lost his election to Bernie Moreno by a margin of about 4 points. A much narrower margin. Sherrod Brown clearly outpaced Kamala Harris, received 2.65 million votes. Kamala Harris received just 2.5 million votes. You'll see the difference is quite apparent there. A lot of Trump voters switched their party, voting down the ballot for Sherrod Brown and potentially some other Democrats, where you saw some of the House Democrats outperforming Kamala Harris in their congressional districts. But the point is that in the state of Ohio, Sherrod Brown recently lost an election, but was able to outpace the top of the ticket in terms of national Democratic performance by a margin of about 7 percentage points, which is pretty massive if you ask me. And Sherrod Brown has an electoral history. In 2018, he won after Donald Trump won Ohio in 2016 by about 8 percentage points. Sherrod Brown defeated Jim Renacki by a margin of around 6 points in this state, a 14-point swing from 2016 to 2018. And it was a pretty impressive performance for Sherrod Brown, who was coming into this with a lot of expectation that this race would narrow up. I mean, all across the country, we saw that a lot of these Trump states actually ended up voting for Democrats, and that was good for them in the 2018 midterm cycle, and Ohio was absolutely no exception. But there's been a lot of conversation around what the future looks like for Sherrod Brown after he lost the Senate election to Bernie Moreno. A lot of expectation that he decides to run for governor in the 2026 race, to which he actually publicly expressed interest in, as determined by Wikipedia, gave it an open idea that he might run for governor, and says, you know what, there's a possibility that he runs in this 2026 race rather than go back to Washington, D.C., instead run for governor. And a lot of Democrats wanted Sherrod Brown to run for governor, and they still want him to run for governor. They see the Republican primary as a cleared field for Vivek Ramaswamy, who we all know from the 2024 presidential election, and a huge proponent of Donald Trump, worked with Elon Musk and Doge before the Trump administration seemingly realized they didn't want to be too closely associated with either of them. He then pivoted, decided to run for governor in the state of Ohio. Every single Republican seemingly considered, okay, well, I want to run. Maybe I'll run. Nobody's going to run or beat Ramaswamy. He has a damning lead in this election against anyone who would want to run against him in the primary, holding 64, 71, 75, 77% of the vote in the Republican primary. No chance that this race is competitive on the GOP primary side. And so Democrats saw this, and they said Ramaswamy has never won an election in his life. He has never ran for office besides for president, and his association with Donald Trump is so far that in some cases, he's more to the right of Donald Trump and seen as more extreme and less likable than Donald Trump. And so what they were hoping for was an A-tier, S-tier candidate even in this Democratic primary, and they found that with Sherrod Brown. Someone who maybe when put up to the stage on a national level could not outpace the Democratic Party in ways that he had been able to when partisanship wasn't as strong as it is now, and that might be able to trickle into Ohio where he would be able to win the governor's race. But it looks like Sherrod Brown doesn't want to run for governor. Axios reporting that he is interviewing campaign managers for a potential Ohio Senate bid in the 2026 year and 2028 year, should he win in 2026. And so that brings us all the way over to yet again another nationalized race, the Ohio Senate special election, November 3rd, 2026. John Huston, who's the former lieutenant governor, now incumbent U.S. senator from the state of Ohio, is running in this race, planning to run through the general election, and has raised about $3 million and already has the endorsement of Donald Trump and the Ohio GOP. On the Democratic side, it seems that Sherrod Brown is the leading contender should he decide to go for it, and it will be a very interesting race. Because Sherrod Brown comes into this, having lost the last election, Democrats are a bit on edge about his run for Senate yet again. While 2026, many Democrats don't deny, will be a different year than the 2024 election year, it's still coming into a state that Donald Trump won by 11 percentage points. Not to mention, again, Sherrod Brown lost the race 2 years ago. Or obviously not 2 years ago for our timeline, but based on 2026, 2 years prior. And thinking about that, thinking about the risk calculation there, Sherrod Brown probably against Ramaswami would be the favorite in the Ohio governor's race. Maybe 45-50% chance there. Maybe not the immediate favorite, but certainly, damn near the favorite in the Ohio governor's race. But that's not what is happening here. He's not wanting to run for the race where he's the most likely to win out of any Democrat. He is the most likely to win in the Senate races here, but his odds of victory go down to maybe 20 or 30% in this race, at least at initial indication. But I think that there is something to be said about the fact that if Democrats do believe that Ramaswamy is the most vulnerable Republican and it is an entirely cleared field, they could run somebody who has outpaced the top of the ticket like Tim Ryan, who has outpaced Democrats when every single time he ran for Congress and when he ran for Senate. He got J.D. Vance down to a 6-point margin in a state that Trump would go on to win by 11 and had already won twice by 8 in a year that was 11 points to the right of 2018. I mean, that was a year where J.D. Vance should have won by massive amounts and won by 6 because Tim Ryan ran arguably a strong campaign. Getting back to the point here, that maybe Tim Ryan could be the Democrat to take on Ramaswamy. Now, I don't think that he will, and I don't think he comes into this with all the electoral odds that Sherrod Brown does. But there seems to be this call internally within the Democratic Party because the Senate elections are so dire. Yes, dire is the right way to put it, because in no circumstance, even with Ohio flipping blue, do Democrats win back Senate control in 2026. They would need Maine, North Carolina, and Ohio, and even then, J.D. Vance would break the tie and give the GOP the outright majority. But the call seems to be within the Democratic Party for every top-tier Democrat to decide to run in the Senate elections because of how dire the map looks. Roy Cooper is in the race in North Carolina after giving nearly every indication he did not want to go to Washington, D.C., even acknowledged that in his own introduction and launch video. When you look at this race too, a lot of calls on Governor Janet Mills in the state of Maine. They want her to run. Why? Because she's the governor and they want somebody who can take on and defeat Susan Collins in this race. And now in Ohio, a race that Democrats would not have looked twice at. The ratings before all the speculation around Sherrod Brown have it as likely, if not safe, Republican. A better characterization than the rating it had on the presidential level when Donald Trump won by 11 percentage points. We are in a place where Sherrod Brown's candidacy could shake this entirely up. But Democrats are rightfully hesitant. They learned that in 2024, partisanship trumps all. Quite literally, trumps all. Bernie Moreno was the weakest GOP nominee in the 2024 year, and even he still won by 4 points. He was by no means the strongest Republican that could have ran for this race, and Democrats were actually pushing for Moreno to be the nominee. Why? Because they knew he would be the easiest to beat if Sherrod Brown was able to do it. And under better circumstances, had the data that Democrats were hoping would come through, the results the Democrats would have hoped would have come through, was that if Kamala Harris had won the presidential election and she had outperformed Biden even by a point in Ohio relative to 2020, Sherrod Brown would still be in the United States Senate, and the next election in Ohio would be in 2028. But that's not the circumstance. Kamala Harris underperformed Joe Biden in Ohio by about 3, and Sherrod Brown lost by 4. And maybe even if she was on par with Biden, and Brown was able to make up that margin because she had made up that margin elsewhere on the national stage. Whatever it might be, there are a lot of realities that Brown could have been able to win re-election in 2024, but the national circumstances weren't there. They were not conducive. If Kamala Harris was losing every single swing state, and Ohio by a larger margin than Clinton and Biden, that made it near impossible for him to win. And so now looking at 2026, what are his odds? I'd say this race starts out as lean Republican. I think Houston probably would win, given a bluer national environment and a bluer Ohio electorate, by about 3 to 4 points. So that runs the risk here for Sherrod Brown. Why run for a race that means you're going to lose? Well, there are a few possibilities here. One, Sherrod Brown in the 2024 election actually faced a lot of money thrown against him by a lot of different groups. A lot of different groups that were investing heavy because they believed that Bernie Moreno was going to lose this race. When you take a look at the amount of money that was raised, Bernie Moreno didn't raise that much. This is a bit misleading. The amount of money that was poured against Sherrod Brown was tremendous in Ohio. $30, $40 million ad buys from outside groups that were all trying to benefit Bernie Moreno. Remember the Kamalas for They Them ad? They ran that for Sherrod Brown and spent tens of millions of dollars behind it right before the election. In 2026, however, Houston is not raising the same amounts that Bernie Moreno is, and he doesn't have the visibility and the it factor in the way that Moreno did in terms of fundraising. Not to mention that Ohio won't be the prime race on the radar for the GOP in 2026. Right? When you're thinking about where they're at, they have a comfortable majority, and they want to do everything they can to maintain that. While Michigan might be a toss-up race for Democrats, almost every other race right now the Democrats are defending, they have pretty good standing in. In Ohio, this would be a race where Democrats, in theory, could catch Republicans sleeping. Whereas on the governor's race, Ramaswamy, who is a weaker candidate, has a lot more money. He's far outpaced every other candidate, Republican or Democrat, in the Ohio governor's race, and not to mention, he has his own personal fortune. Right now, Ramaswamy says that he's brought in $10 million in the same time that Democrats only raised $1.35 million in the Ohio governor's race. Not to mention, another super PAC supporting Ramaswamy says that they got a $10 million contribution. Ramaswamy at baseline, just based on the numbers that he raised in a 3-month period, and I can guarantee you he has far more than this. But even at the bare minimum, assuming he had $0 elsewhere, and we know he's a businessman and he has a lot of money, he has $20 million to Houston's $3 million. And Sherrod Brown, too, if he decides to run for Senate, can use the money that was left over from the last election for this Senate race. If he runs for governor, he cannot. And so there are some calculations here that make it so Sherrod Brown might be more inclined to run for Senate, especially if Democrats are of the mindset of leaving everything on the field. While yes, it might be fun for Sherrod Brown to be governor, he might prefer being in the U.S. Senate. And if it does pay off, this will be seen as the most masterful Senate gambit the Democrats run in the midterm cycle. Not North Carolina, not Maine, but Ohio, because of how far out of reach it was perceived and was in the last election. That under the right midterm environment, maybe Ohio could be there. But I don't think that Democrats should count on it. I don't think that they should count on it to the degree that they believe it's a closed race and that Brown is easily going to win. If he wins, it will be, should he decide to run for it too. There's a lot of hypotheticals, but it looks like he's more inclined to run for Senate than governor right now. And should he decide to go for it and should he win, it will be a fluke. A fluke because his team would have worked significantly harder than the Republican Party because they are coming up against a Republican plus 11 state. And it will be a very successful campaign should it win. But if he loses and the governorship falls to Ramaswamy, there will be questions about how the National Democratic Party should have or should not have involved themselves in this race and to what degree, and how they should have maneuvered some of their top candidates for races that are winnable versus not. Because Houston is no Moreno. He's not as unpopular, he's not as well known, and for good reason. He has the opportunity to define himself in a positive way across the state. And we'll see how he does that. But as we look ahead to the 2026 midterm elections, I'm honestly quite surprised by this news that Sherrod Brown wants to run for Senate. And obviously things are up in the air and he could change his mind and Axios could be wrong, but they could be right. And looking at their reporting before, they've often gotten things very right in the 2026 cycle. So keep your eyes peeled in the Ohio Senate race. Does Sherrod Brown decide to run? How does he perform? We will find out if he announces sometime soon. It'd be a very interesting race because this would mark election number 2 in the span of 2 years for Sherrod Brown, that if he wins it, would mark an election number 3 within 4 years, all for the same United States Senate position, which would be fascinating, to say the least. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.